MTV, CBS, the NFL had no knowledge of this whatsoever, and unfortunately, the whole thing went wrong in the end. I am really sorry if I offended anyone. That was truly not my intention.
By 2001, Justin Timberlake was just 20 years old, fresh out of NSYNC and standing at one of the toughest crossroads a young pop star can face. The boy band era had made him rich, famous, and instantly recognizable, but it also locked him inside a box he was desperate to break out of. To the industry, he was still the grinning, choreographed face of teen pop, but to Justin, that image felt like a ceiling closing in on him. When Justified dropped in 2002, it became a commercial win. The album sold big. Radio couldn't stop playing it, and critics noticed he was trying to evolve. The beats were tighter, the tone was older, and the swagger was new. But behind the scenes, record execs still weren't convinced. Sure, the numbers looked great, but the question lingered. Was Justin truly a solo powerhouse, or just a boy band frontman trying to act grown? He needed something more, something that screamed credibility. He needed moments that went beyond chart success. He needed to stand next to artists who already commanded respect, people whose presence could elevate his own. And that's where Janet Jackson came in. By the time early talks for the 2004 Super Bowl halftime show started floating around in late 2003, Janet was on an entirely different level. She wasn't testing new waters, she was the ocean, a seasoned veteran, a global superstar, and one of the few black women in pop history ever trusted with the Super Bowl stage. For MTV, the NFL, and CBS, the pairing sounded like a dream come true. Janet Jackson, dominance and experience, meets Justin Timberlake, youth and fresh energy. For Justin, it was the perfect setup. A chance to prove he could stand alongside an icon and finally break free from the shadows of his past. What connected Janet Jackson and Justin Timberlake wasn't friendship or chemistry, it was proximity to power. But before anything else, it's important to be clear about what their relationship wasn't. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't emotional. There were no secret calls at midnight, no deep connection, no shared past. They didn't move in the same social circles at all. People who worked with both of them described the vibe as purely professional, polite but distant. Janet came in focused on perfection and execution, while Justin came in focused on opportunity and visibility. They weren't equals in leverage, but on paper, they both carried the same level of risk. Behind the scenes, though, that balance was already starting to tip. Janet's name held major power, but it also came with decades of scrutiny. Every move she made was filtered through conversations about race, gender, and sexuality. For her, every performance came with layers of risk and expectation. Justin, on the other hand, stood in a much safer position within the entertainment system. He was young, male, white, and constantly painted by the media as charming instead of controversial. And that difference, though quiet, was everything. It shaped how the world would react to what was coming. As rehearsals began, the production followed the usual Super Bowl playbook. Tight deadlines, endless approvals, and a mountain of creative decisions passing through MTV, CBS, and NFL execs. Every detail was planned down to the second, or so Janet thought. According to insiders who later spoke anonymously to music journalists, nothing about the show was ever presented to Janet as risky or reckless. The goal was big spectacle, flashy, fun, and unforgettable, not scandal. But behind the curtain, whispers started floating around about last-minute creative tweaks being discussed. Ideas that hadn't gone through Janet's usual strict approval process. And those quiet, unconfirmed talks would soon lead to one of the most shocking moments in live TV history. No one ever wrote down what was said in those behind-the-scenes talks. No notes, no confirmations, no trail of who approved what. That lack of clarity would later turn into the most dangerous part of it all. For Justin Timberlake, this performance wasn't just another gig, it was a career-defining moment. This was his chance to stand on the biggest stage in American entertainment and finally prove he wasn't just that kid from NSYNC. It was his public graduation, his official transformation from boy band heartthrob to solo superstar. People close to him later said Justin felt the pressure heavy. He wanted something unforgettable, something explosive that would permanently separate him from his pop past. But unforgettable doesn't always mean safe. And when the chaos hits, someone always ends up taking the fall. As the show date drew closer, Janet turned completely inward. She rehearsed endlessly, checking every move, every beat, every cue. She treated the halftime show with the same perfectionism she brought to every huge performance in her career. For her, precision was power. Justin, meanwhile, approached it all with a totally different vibe. More relaxed, less guarded, and more willing to trust the massive team around him. He was open to last-minute changes, spontaneous tweaks, little moments that could make it pop on screen, and that difference, her control versus his looseness, would change everything once things went wrong. What the world remembers as one shocking moment, a single motion, a flash, a camera cut, wasn't where the real damage started. The fallout began before the lights even came on. It was already building in the silence, in the assumptions both artists made about protection and trust. Janet believed her discipline, her control, her decades of professionalism would shield her from any harm. She had no idea that control was about to vanish in a split second, and that the world would never let her take it back. Justin Timberlake assumed momentum alone would keep him moving forward. He thought his rising fame, charm, and growing popularity would carry him through any storm. But neither he nor Janet could have predicted how fast the industry machine would pick sides once the Super Bowl chaos hit. As the media outrage exploded and executives scrambled to rewrite the story, everything changed within hours. The assumptions both artists had built their careers on, trust, fairness, control, collided hard. Suddenly, Janet was bombarded with questions dripping in accusation, all framed around her intent, her choices, her fault. Meanwhile, Justin released statements that were polite, vague, and carefully worded. Safe. He didn't stand next to her in public. He didn't call out the unfair coverage. He didn't challenge the narrative that was painting Janet as the villain. And to the industry, that was perfectly fine. They didn't expect him to. This was the moment where the quiet resentment started to grow. Not because Justin ran in panic, many would have, but because his silence fit too neatly into a system already built to protect him while discarding her. He was absorbed and forgiven while she was isolated and punished. Janet saw the truth of it instantly. She'd spent her whole life reading power. She knew how these rooms worked. She recognized that silence wasn't neutral. It was strategic. It was being used as a weapon. The conversation stopped being about what actually happened and instead became about who was going to pay the price. And Janet saw exactly who the system had chosen to protect. People who were close to her at the time said she stayed calm on the surface, even though inside she was shattered. No outbursts, no angry interviews, no dramatic statements, just quiet calculation. According to accounts, Janet later confirmed that she made a deliberate choice. She told Justin to stay quiet, to not make it worse, to let the noise burn out on its own. She knew how the industry handled controversy. It always looked for the most vulnerable target to sacrifice and then moved on. And deep down, she already knew who that target was going to be. That decision is often mistaken for forgiveness, but it wasn't forgiveness at all. It was recognition. Janet Jackson understood exactly what was happening. She recognized that the entertainment machine had already made its choice, and no amount of speaking out could change it. She also saw that Justin, whether he meant to or not, was benefiting from that machine's protection. The resentment that grew between them wasn't loud or messy. It was quiet, steady, and deeply personal. It didn't come from anger over a performance. It came from a much deeper wound. Janet realized that when the moment came, Justin Timberlake had a choice. He could stand up beside her or step back and let the system throw her under the bus. He chose the safer path. And for Janet, a woman who had built her entire life around controlling her image and protecting her boundaries, that decision hit harder than any headline ever could. Chapter 3. The Super Bowl night, the move, the silence, and the betrayal. February 1st, 2004, Reliance Stadium, Houston, Texas. By the time the halftime countdown hit 0, everything felt perfectly normal. Inside the stadium, over 70,000 fans screamed in anticipation. Outside, more than 150 million people around the world were tuned in live. Janet Jackson stepped onto that field the same way she had walked onto every major stage throughout her career, with poise, precision, and total control. She was calm, confident, and ready. Every beat had been drilled, every step rehearsed, every camera angle carefully mapped out. This wasn't new territory for her. She had done live shows her entire life. But what Janet didn't know that night was that one split-second deviation, one unscripted move, was about to destroy years of discipline, control, and trust. Everything she thought she had locked down was seconds away from shattering in front of the entire world. This wasn't Janet Jackson's first high-stakes performance, and it was never meant to be her last moment of control. Everything about the Super Bowl halftime show was running perfectly. The lights hit exactly on cue, the dancers moved like a machine, and every beat of choreography landed sharp and flawless. When Justin Timberlake joined her for the final section, it looked like a smooth passing of the torch, the legendary icon and the rising star, sharing the biggest stage in America. There was no tension, no hint of chaos, no signal that anything was about to go wrong. Everything felt routine, electric, but controlled. Then came the final lyric. I'm gonna have you naked by the end of this song. It wasn't ad-libbed, it wasn't spontaneous. The line had been cleared through producers, network standards, and rehearsals. Everyone involved knew the lyric. It was meant as a metaphor, not a literal act. But when the music hit its final beat, the moment that changed everything happened. Justin stepped forward and made the move. There was no pause, no signal to the crew, no camera cue, just one swift action. And in a blink, Janet's costume was pulled open, and the live broadcast crossed a line that could never be erased. The cameras didn't cut away. The music didn't stop. The crowd didn't even seem to realize what had happened. But Janet did. She froze. She didn't scream. She didn't have time to cover herself. She didn't get the chance to take back control. In that instant, her body, her image, and her power were no longer hers. They belonged to the broadcast, to the headlines, and to a world that would replay that half second again and again, without context, without mercy, and without ever asking how it really happened. For a woman who had built her entire career on precision and control, that single instant became the moment everything she feared most came true. Public exposure, stripped of consent, played for the world to see. When the lights dimmed and the music faded, Janet Jackson walked off that stage in shock. Crew members who saw her backstage later said she looked calm, too calm, but underneath, she was completely frozen. There were no angry words, no confrontation, just a wave of confusion spreading fast through the production area. Phones started buzzing, voices got sharper, and within minutes, executives realized the unthinkable had just gone out live to the entire country. Suddenly, chaos took over. Network heads were calling each other nonstop, lawyers were being pulled into late-night meetings, and PR teams scrambled to contain what was already spiraling out of control. The question wasn't what happened, it was who was going to take the blame. And in those first frantic hours, one crucial thing never happened. There was no united response, no joint statement, no visible partnership between the two performers. Janet waited, quietly, carefully. People close to her later said she expected something simple, not a dramatic press conference, not a media circus, just a moment of solidarity. Two artists side by side saying, this was a mistake, not an intention. That's all she needed. But that moment never came. Instead, the divide formed almost instantly. Less than 24 hours later, Janet released a public apology. Her statement was calm, serious, and full of accountability. She took responsibility, made it clear that the moment wasn't planned, and expressed deep regret to anyone offended. It was textbook damage control, but it also placed every ounce of blame right on her shoulders. The media devoured it. Headlines exploded, commentators went wild. Suddenly, Janet wasn't just part of the story, she was the story. Meanwhile, Justin's response went in a completely different direction. While she faced the storm head-on, his statements were softer, vaguer, and strategically detached. He spoke, but only just enough to keep himself out of the fire. And in that split, the narrative was sealed. Janet Jackson became the face of scandal, while Justin Timberlake quietly slipped into safety. Justin Timberlake's statements after the incident were smooth, distant, and extremely careful. He leaned on one safe phrase: wardrobe malfunction. He avoided describing the move itself and never fully tied his own name to the responsibility in the way Janet had. There was no joint apology, no shared interview, no united front, nothing. The silence between them became the loudest sound of the night. As news coverage exploded, the media wasted no time turning chaos into scandal. Janet's name was splashed across every headline next to words like indecency, shock, and outrage. Her artistic past, even her vulnerable album The Velvet Rope, was twisted into proof that the moment was somehow intentional instead of expressive. Suddenly, commentators were dissecting her career, politicians were calling for action, and moral watchdogs demanded punishment. Behind the scenes, the industry moved just as fast, quietly and strategically. Meetings were held in network offices where Janet wasn't invited. Executives debated how to contain the damage, and every conversation seemed to have one unspoken goal: make Janet the face of the problem. Decisions came down fast and ruthless. Within days, her scheduled Grammy appearance vanished from the lineup without explanation. Radio stations across the country began dropping her songs or cutting her airplay altogether. Major TV networks started putting distance between themselves and her name. The message was clear: someone had to pay, and that someone was Janet Jackson. Meanwhile, Justin kept going like nothing had happened. His tour dates stayed locked in. His radio plays never dipped. His image stayed clean. There were no public bans, no professional setbacks, just momentum. To the outside world, it looked like two people had been part of the same incident, but only one had been chosen to take the fall. And that's when it hit Janet with full clarity. The truth she had always known but hoped wasn't real. In the system she'd spent her whole life navigating, power didn't protect everyone equally. The same stage that had celebrated her one night was now using her as a warning. Control had failed her, and this time, silence wouldn't save her. The real damage after the Super Bowl wasn't just about the performance, it was about abandonment. People who were close to Janet during that time said her anger didn't explode outward, it turned inward. It was quiet, heavy, and deeply painful. She didn't go on a media tirade. She didn't call out Justin by name. Instead, she stepped back, looked at everything clearly, and saw the truth for what it was. Janet realized the system had moved fast, protecting one person while isolating the other. She knew that if she spoke out too loudly, the industry would turn on her even harder. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was survival. According to Janet's own later accounts, she made a calculated decision that still shocks people to this day. She told Justin to keep quiet, to say less, not more. Let the storm hit her if it had to, just so it wouldn't grow big enough to destroy them both. That wasn't forgiveness. It was pure strategy. Janet understood the system's rhythm better than anyone. She saw that fighting head-on wouldn't fix it. It would only make the machine hit back harder. But understanding the game didn't mean she didn't feel the sting. The betrayal wasn't what happened on stage. It was what didn't happen afterward. It was the silence, the absence, the choice to stay back instead of standing beside her when it mattered most. Justin didn't have to be her savior. He just needed to be a witness. Someone who could publicly confirm what she already knew, that it wasn't intentional, that she wasn't alone. But that moment never came. As the days passed, the clip replayed endlessly. On every TV, every news loop, every late-night joke. The industry shut its doors tighter and tighter, acting like she was the problem that needed to disappear. Janet Jackson, one of the most controlled, disciplined, and iconic women in pop history, was suddenly being rewritten by everyone but herself. The woman who had spent decades mastering her image now watched helplessly as it was stripped away, replaced by one ugly word: scandal. The silence that once protected Janet Jackson suddenly turned into her greatest enemy. The very shield she had relied on for survival now worked against her, allowing others to speak for her while she stood alone, taking every hit. That's the part of the Super Bowl story most people never talk about. The real destruction didn't happen in those 5 seconds on stage. It happened in the hours that followed. It happened in the conference rooms she wasn't invited into, in the calls she never heard, in the statements released without her approval. The real betrayal lived in those closed-door decisions, where the system quietly decided who would take the fall. And when Janet finally realized she was the sacrifice, everything changed. The dynamic between her and Justin Timberlake was never the same again. Chapter 4, the one they chose to sacrifice. If Super Bowl night was the explosion, the weeks that followed were the slow, controlled execution of Janet's career in real time. By mid-February 2004, she could already feel the shift. The scandal had left the headlines and moved somewhere far more dangerous. Behind the scenes, in executive boardrooms, in private phone calls, and in quiet meetings, the future of her career was being discussed by people she'd never even met. Decisions were made silently, then denied loudly. What stunned Janet most wasn't the outrage she saw on TV. It was how fast the industry had already decided who was going to pay the price. The first hit came out of nowhere. Janet had been scheduled to appear at the 2004 Grammy Awards, a stage she'd earned more than once throughout her career. But suddenly, without warning, the invitation was gone. No explanation, no conversation, no apology, just erased. 1 minute she was set to stand among legends, the next she was blacklisted. And that's when the truth hit with full force. This wasn't about scandal anymore. This was about sacrifice. Someone had to fall for what happened on that stage, and the system made sure it wasn't going to be Justin Timberlake. There was no clear explanation, no public statement, no official reason that made sense. Just a quiet message passed through intermediaries saying Janet Jackson's Grammy appearance was no longer appropriate. The meaning behind those words was obvious. The punishment had officially begun. As word of the snub leaked out, the narrative hardened fast. Janet wasn't just being criticized. She was being disciplined publicly and symbolically as a warning to everyone watching. The message was cold and unmistakable. Step out of line and you'll face consequences, no matter who you are. From that point on, every door that once opened easily began to slam shut. MTV and VH1 music directors quietly pulled her videos from rotation.
Thing is I've always called him Joseph. I tried calling him Dad.
Some radio stations stopped playing her songs completely, even the classics. Program directors who had supported her for years suddenly blamed listener sensitivity or corporate policy. Invitations that once arrived automatically were now under review. Each move seemed small in isolation, but together they built an invisible wall around her career. Behind the scenes, the whispers grew louder. According to multiple journalists and insiders who later spoke off the record, the pressure wasn't coming from random network staff, it was coming straight from the top of the corporate ladder. All eyes turned to Les Moonves, then one of the most powerful men in American media and the head of Viacom, the parent company of CBS. Insiders said the tone from the top wasn't about punishment, it was about control. The message, as described by people in those rooms, was harsh and simple. Someone had to be made an example of. And to them, Janet Jackson fit the profile too perfectly to ignore. She was visible, she was black, she was female, and she had long used her art to explore themes of independence and sexuality. Those traits, instead of protecting her, made her an easy target in the corporate world's eyes. She didn't have the same institutional safety net as the men in suits calling the shots, and in their cold, calculated logic, that made her the perfect sacrifice. Every decision that followed only reinforced one truth. Janet wasn't just being punished for a moment. She was being controlled, silenced, and erased by design. Janet Jackson wasn't treated as guilty. She was treated as expendable. Not because she'd done something wrong, but because she was useful to the system's agenda. She became the perfect distraction, the perfect scapegoat, and she felt that shift instantly. Phone calls that used to get returned in minutes suddenly went unanswered. Meetings were quietly postponed. People who once praised her professionalism now spoke in careful, robotic tones, as if they were afraid of being associated with her name. She wasn't directly accused, but she was completely isolated. And in an industry built on access, isolation is the same as erasure. What made it even harder was watching the contrast unfold in real time. While Janet's career hit a wall, Justin Timberlake kept soaring. His songs stayed on heavy rotation. His interviews continued. His brand partnerships never wavered. There were no network bans, no pulled appearances, no emergency PR meetings about his image. To the public, it looked like two artists had shared one controversial moment, but behind the curtain, the consequences were wildly uneven. To Janet, it was crystal clear. The decision had already been made long before she even had a chance to defend herself. Behind the scenes, the pressure around her only grew tighter. Advisors told her to stay calm, to let it pass. Lawyers warned her not to challenge the corporate giants who were already in full-blown moral panic mode. Friends begged her to be patient, whispering the same terrifying message. If you fight this, it'll only get worse. That's when Janet made the phone call that would haunt her for years. She reached out to Justin directly. People close to her later described that conversation as heartbreakingly calm, measured, deliberate, and devastating. There were no screams, no accusations, just a woman trying to salvage what little control she had left. Janet asked him to keep quiet, to not make it worse, to let the storm die down on its own. But what she didn't realize in that moment was that her silence, meant to protect them both, would end up protecting only one. There was no shouting, no blame, just cold, painful clarity. When Janet Jackson got Justin Timberlake on the phone, she didn't lecture him or demand apologies. She told him the truth as she saw it. She explained that the industry had already picked a single target, and it was her. She warned that if he pushed back too hard, if he tried to challenge the narrative or speak out for both of them, the machine wouldn't protect him either. It would just widen the blast and take them both down. Her words were calm but heavy. Don't say anything else. If you speak up, they'll pull you under too. That wasn't forgiveness, it was triage. Janet wasn't trying to make peace. She was trying to survive. It was a calculation she had learned long ago, growing up in a world where authority always had the final word. She knew exactly how power worked. She knew that fighting back at the wrong time didn't make you brave. It made you collateral damage. She recognized that once the industry had picked a sacrifice, the only question left was how many people would get burned alongside it. And so, she told him to stay quiet, to protect himself. Justin listened. And that's where the resentment began to harden. Not because he obeyed, but because he thrived from it. Janet knew Justin wasn't behind her downfall. She knew he hadn't orchestrated the punishment or the silence. The system was far bigger than both of them. But knowledge doesn't erase pain. And it didn't change what everyone could see. He was being lifted higher while she was being pushed out. His silence became his shield. Her silence became her sentence. By the time February faded into March, the situation was cemented. Industry insiders stopped calling Janet a collaborator and started labeling her a risk. The conversations in boardrooms changed tone, no longer about her talent, but about her liability. And Janet, once one of the most powerful women in pop music, found herself on the outside of an empire she had helped build. All because she tried to protect someone in a system that was never built to protect her. Soon the phrase, "what happened at the Super Bowl," became corporate code for risk. Suddenly, her name alone made executives nervous. Projects were quietly stalled, brand deals evaporated overnight, and every time Janet Jackson asked why, the answers came back the same, vague, polite, and final. No one said the truth out loud, but she knew it. She had become a cautionary tale. She sat back and watched headlines stack up, stories dissecting her career, her body, and her art, without her voice anywhere in the conversation. Politicians used her name to score points. Moral commentators called her out without a shred of context, and her past work, especially the Velvet Rope, was twisted into evidence that she had somehow planned the entire thing. Through it all, the people who had the power to shift the story, to stand beside her, to say this was a mistake, not a crime, stayed silent. That silence did something permanent. It didn't just hurt, it hardened. It turned pain into something colder, sharper, resentment. So that Janet didn't hate Justin because of what happened on that stage. She hated everything that came after. She hated how when the system showed its true face, cold, strategic, and unforgiving, he got to stay shielded while she was left completely exposed. She hated watching his career continue to thrive in the same industry that had slammed its door shut on her. She hated that the burden of surviving the fallout landed solely on her shoulders, while he was praised, promoted, and forgiven without even asking for it. This was the moment Janet truly understood the price of being chosen as the example. It wasn't just about lost work or fading fame, it was about something much deeper. It was the crushing realization that loyalty, fairness, and shared responsibility only exist when they don't threaten power. Once that truth settled in, something inside Janet Jackson closed for good. The woman who had built her career on control, strength, and composure finally saw the cost of it all. Because in the end, silence hadn't saved her. It had buried her voice while protecting everyone else's. By the end of March 2004, Janet Jackson was no longer fighting to clear her name. She was fighting to exist within an industry that had decided she was expendable. The anger she carried was not loud or reckless. It was disciplined, contained, and permanent. The kind of anger that does not explode, but settles. And it settled squarely on one truth. When everything collapsed, she stood alone, and the person who could have stood with her chose not to. That is why this chapter matters, because the Super Bowl scandal did not destroy Janet Jackson being selected, isolated, and abandoned did. And once that realization took hold, the relationship between Janet Jackson and Justin Timberlake was no longer just strained. It was poisoned by the knowledge that when power demanded a sacrifice, only one of them was offered up, and only one of them walked away untouched. Chapter 5, Silent Hatred, 20 years of quiet damage. What followed the Super Bowl did not look like destruction. At first, there were no screaming headlines every day, no public meltdowns, no explosive interviews. Instead, Instead, what happened to Janet Jackson was far more efficient and far more brutal. She was not canceled loudly. She was slowly, deliberately removed. In the months after 2004, Janet was still technically famous. Her name was still recognizable. Her catalog still existed, but the center of gravity shifted. Soon, the phrase, "what happened at the Super Bowl," became corporate code for risk. Suddenly, her name alone made executives nervous. Projects were quietly stalled, brand deals evaporated overnight, and every time Janet Jackson asked why, the answers came back the same: vague, polite, and final. No one said the truth out loud, but she knew it. She had become a cautionary tale. She sat back and watched headlines stack up, stories dissecting her career, her body, and her art, without her voice anywhere in the conversation. Politicians used her name to score points. Moral commentators called her out without a shred of context, and her past work, especially the Velvet Rope, was twisted into evidence that she had somehow planned the entire thing. Through it all, the people who had the power to shift the story, to stand beside her, to say this was a mistake, not a crime, stayed silent. That silence did something permanent. It didn't just hurt, it hardened. It turned pain into something colder, sharper, resentment. Janet didn't hate Justin because of what happened on that stage. She hated everything that came after. She hated how, when the system showed its true face, cold, strategic, and unforgiving, he got to stay shielded while she was left completely exposed. She hated watching his career continue to thrive in the same industry that had slammed its door shut on her. She hated that the burden of surviving the fallout landed solely on her shoulders, while he was praised, promoted, and forgiven without even asking for it. This was the moment Janet truly understood the price of being chosen as the example. It wasn't just about lost work or fading fame. It was about something much deeper. It was the crushing realization that loyalty, fairness, and shared responsibility only exist when they don't threaten power. Once that truth settled in, something inside Janet Jackson closed for good. The woman who had built her career on control, strength, and composure finally saw the cost of it all, because in the end, silence hadn't saved her. It had buried her voice while protecting everyone else's. By the end of March 2004, Janet Jackson wasn't fighting to clear her name anymore. She was fighting just to exist inside an industry that had quietly decided she was expendable. The anger she carried wasn't loud or reckless. It was quiet, precise, and permanent. The kind of anger that doesn't explode. It settles heavy and unmoving, anchored in one painful truth. When everything collapsed, Janet stood alone, and the one person who could have stood with her chose not to. That's why this chapter matters so much. The Super Bowl moment itself didn't destroy Janet Jackson. Being selected, isolated, and abandoned did. Once that realization hit, the bond between Janet and Justin Timberlake wasn't just strained, it was poisoned. Because when power demanded a sacrifice, only one of them was placed on the altar, and only one of them walked away untouched. Chapter 5, Silent Hatred. 20 years of quiet damage. What came after the Super Bowl didn't look like chaos, it looked like calm. There were no daily screaming headlines, no emotional breakdowns on camera, no fiery interviews. The destruction was quieter than that, colder, more calculated, and far more brutal. Janet Jackson wasn't canceled in one dramatic explosion. She was erased in slow motion. In the months following 2004, she was still famous. Her name still meant something. Her catalog was still iconic, but the center of gravity had shifted. She was being quietly pushed out of the very system she'd helped build. Her influence remained, but her access disappeared. The big invitation stopped coming. The opportunities that once arrived without question now came with excuses, reviews, or long silences. And while the public thought things had simply moved on inside the industry, doors were locking one by one. Janet had survived countless eras of pop, but this one was different. It wasn't a battle she could outdance, outwork, or outcontrol. This was exile wrapped in silence, a slow fade designed to look like choice. And it all started the night the world decided that one woman's mistake was easier to believe than an entire system's hypocrisy. Janet Jackson was no longer treated as a force shaping culture. She was reduced to a reference from the past. A name attached to a scandal instead of an artist shaping the moment. The woman who once set the standard for pop performance and creativity had suddenly become a footnote. Invitations that used to appear automatically stopped showing up altogether. Her new music still dropped, but it arrived quietly, without the urgency, energy, or full push from the industry that once stood behind her. Executives spoke about her in hushed, cautious tones, as if even mentioning her name carried professional risk. No one came after her directly anymore. They didn't have to. They simply stepped back, leaving her surrounded by silence. And that silence cut deep because it gave her no one to fight. There was no headline to respond to, no enemy to confront, just absence. Still, Janet didn't stop. She kept creating, touring on her own terms, appearing when she chose to. But everything felt smaller now. The way the world described her had changed. Where she was once called an innovator, a trailblazer, a leader, she was now labeled a legacy act far earlier than her career deserved. Her sexuality, once celebrated as bold, artistic, and empowering, was now treated like a PR hazard. Networks avoided her image, and brand deals that once celebrated her confidence now looked the other way. The powerful, self-controlled, sensual icon that Janet had built for decades was frozen in time, stuck to the moment of the scandal, and never allowed to grow beyond it. And what made that wound even sharper was the contrast playing out right beside her. While Janet's career was quietly shrinking, Justin Timberlake's star was exploding. He swept up Grammy Awards, dropped chart-dominating albums that were treated like cultural events, crossed over into acting, and earned a level of mainstream respectability that the system had stolen from her. Two careers had shared one stage, but only one was allowed to move forward. For Janet, the silence surrounding her wasn't just professional, it was personal, haunting, and painfully unfair. The same media that once crowned her queen had rewritten her as a warning, while the man who stood beside her became the industry's golden boy. In 2018, Justin Timberlake returned to the Super Bowl halftime stage, an opportunity Janet Jackson was never offered again. To the public, it looked like a coincidence. To Janet, it felt like confirmation. The industry had officially moved on without her. And still, she said nothing. Year after year, interviewers tried to get her to react. They asked about the Super Bowl. They asked about Justin. They asked if she felt betrayed. But every single time, Janet handled it with poise and restraint. She didn't attack. She didn't relive the trauma. She didn't give the media the fiery confrontation it craved. On the surface, her silence looked like forgiveness. But underneath, it was pure containment. Those closest to Janet have said it for years. Her silence wasn't about peace, it was about control. She had learned the hardest truth of all, that speaking out doesn't guarantee justice. It just guarantees more punishment. Every time she thought about finally telling her full side of the story, the same cold calculation came back. Who benefits and who pays? And for nearly 20 years, that answer never changed. But time started shifting the lens. As culture evolved and younger generations began revisiting old scandals, people started to look at 2004 differently. New articles, documentaries, and think pieces reframed that infamous night, not as a pop mistake, but as a case study in selective accountability. People began to see what had really happened, that Janet Jackson had been sacrificed to protect the system, not because she deserved it, but because she was easier to blame. Janet didn't lead that movement. She didn't jump into the conversation or correct the record. She just watched, quietly, calmly, as others finally started connecting the dots. Then, in 2021, something unexpected happened. Justin Timberlake issued a public apology. In a rare moment of public reflection, he admitted that he had benefited from a system that protected him while harming others, including Janet. It was a statement many saw as overdue. But for Janet, it was never about words. It was about what those words couldn't undo. Nearly 2 decades of silence, isolation, and damage that she had carried alone. Justin Timberlake's 2021 apology sparked huge debate. But for Janet Jackson, it wasn't closure, and it definitely wasn't redemption. For her, it was confirmation that everything she had known since 2004 was finally being said out loud. Years too late, long after the damage was already done. When Janet finally addressed the scandal in her 2022 documentary, her tone wasn't bitter, it was calm, controlled, and deeply reflective. She spoke with the same discipline that had defined her entire life. She said they had both moved on. She didn't deny the pain, but she refused to weaponize it. That's what makes the hatred in her story so complicated. It wasn't loud or messy, it lived quietly. It existed in memories, in the sharp contrast between two very different fates, and in the knowledge that when the moment of truth came, she was the one left standing Jackson didn't spend 2 decades plotting revenge. She spent them remembering who was protected, who was forgiven, who kept rising while she was quietly pushed aside. She carried that truth, not as a grudge, but as a scar, a permanent reminder of how fast the industry she helped build decided she was expendable. That's the quiet truth at the center of this story. Not rage, not chaos, but a long, disciplined silence carrying the full weight of betrayal. A silence that never needed to scream to prove it was real. In the end, the man Janet Jackson resented most wasn't the one who caused the scandal. It was the one who survived it without standing beside her. Not because of that one move on stage, but because when everything collapsed, he chose silence, safety, and self-preservation while she was left to take the full hit. For 20 years, Janet watched from the sidelines as Justin Timberlake collected awards, headlined stages, and even returned to the Super Bowl. And through it all, her own name, once a symbol of power and independence, became something whispered behind closed doors, used as a warning instead of a legacy. Her hatred was never loud. It wasn't screamed online, sold to the press, or written in songs. It was quiet, controlled, and permanent. It lived in the sharp truth that when the system needed someone to destroy, it chose her. And he let it happen. Janet Jackson didn't need to speak for the world to understand her pain. Every silence, every pause, every calm answer, and every interview carried the same message. Forgiveness was never the point. The real question was whether breaking her silence would have given her justice or simply destroyed what little she still had left. So now, ask yourself, was Janet's silence a form of forgiveness, or was it her final act of power? Proof that speaking out in a rigged system would only feed the machine that tried to erase her. Because in the end, the most dangerous stories in music don't end on stage. They end with who's allowed to walk away untouched. If you felt this story, like, subscribe, share, and drop a comment below. Let's talk about the real power plays behind Black music history. Because the truth deserves to be heard, not hidden.